This story begins across the globe in Vietnam. I've made it out of my temporary home in the capital city of Hanoi, and I'm racing on my motorbike into the countryside. It's a long ride, but as soon as we reach our destination, all of my inner chatter turns into silence and awe. I face the most magnificent mountain, so dense with flora that it's almost impossible to tell a tree from a bush from the wild grass dancing across the mountain floor. The grandeur of the ridgeline reminds me of Vietnamese folklore, which claims that the mountains are the backs of sleeping dragons. And in that moment, it clicks. I am deeply a part of all of this. My story is not unique. Maybe you've had a similar experience in a different landscape. Perhaps you've witnessed a beautiful Colorado sunset and, in a small way, you felt profoundly connected. This feeling of connection is commonly referred to as interdependence. Spiritual traditions, philosophic ideas, and scientific study all recognize the importance of understanding interdependence. From a spiritual or philosophic perspective, interdependence might mean, I am, therefore you are, therefore I am, or whatever's happening in the world is happening to me too. From a biologic perspective, interdependence claims that all organisms depend on each other. So if the population of one species rises or falls, then the rest of the ecosystem is affected. No matter what definition resonates with you, its essence is that life is intertwined. Okay, I'm gonna ask that you accept this idea for a moment, even if it's just for the remainder of the talk. I want you to imagine what the world might look like if we as humans recognize our interdependence as a foundation of reality. How might we think differently? How might we act differently? Understanding interdependence will radically change how we treat the natural world and address the climate crisis. So let's start with climate change. The majority of US Americans agree that climate change has been caused by humans' accelerated use of fossil fuels. And that's true. That's the how, in simplified terms. But what's missing from the conversation is the why. Why did we get to this point? Climate change is not just a consequence of humans' accelerated use of fossil fuels. It's a consequence of our misunderstanding between the relationships of humans and nature. In the United States, we've created, strengthened, and justified a strict divide between humans and the natural world. Nature is viewed as an entity that can be conquered or protected, nurtured or exploited, feared or enjoyed, but in all of these cases, we are the subject. Nature is the object. We've lost part of ourselves, which is nature itself. And in the United States, the separation between humans and nature has even been a cornerstone of our culture. Even people that we celebrate as great environmentalists, such as Henry Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and John Muir, have perpetuated this divide. These influential thinkers wrote about nature as divine, remote, sacred, and importantly, away from humans. Nature was something out there that you had to get to in order to experience. When the Wilderness Act of 1964 was passed, wilderness was defined as an area of earth where its community of life is untrampled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. Did you catch that? Where humans are visitors who do not remain. Similarly, if you were to look up the definition of nature in the dictionary, you might find the natural world as it exists without human beings or civilization. So there's humans and there's nature. And we've internalized this split because how could we not? So it's totally unsurprising that even our solutions to the climate crisis reflect this perceived separation. Our focus on technological solutions is indicative of the belief that we are superior to nature, that we can control nature, and at the very core that we are separate from nature. And while technological advances do have a role and are certainly necessary to combat the irreversible damage that we've already made, we need a shift in our thinking, our consciousness, and our relationship with nature. That begins by addressing the root cause and recognizing the intrinsic worth of all living beings and our radical interdependence within it all. Okay, so we have this concept of interdependence. What do we do with it? How do we actually apply it to our lives? Well, let's start with our mindsets. What do you think of when you think of a table? Maybe laughter at a family meal or a pile of work waiting for you at home. Well, when Buddhist leader Thich Nhat Hanh looked at a table, he saw something completely different. He said, "For a table to exist, we need wood, a carpenter, time, skillfulness, and many other causes. And each of those causes needs other causes to be. The wood needs the forest, the rain, the sunshine, and so on. The carpenter needs his parents, breakfast, fresh air, and so on. And each of those things in turn needs other causes to be brought about." Looking deeply in this way, we can see that nothing has been left out. Everything in the cosmos has come together to bring us this table. Looking deeply at the sunshine, the clouds, or the leaves in the tree, we can see the table. So this is different, right? We don't typically think about the interdependent processes that compose objects or affect living beings. It's something that we literally have to train our minds into doing simply because we're not used to doing it. This could start with thinking about where your lunch came from or the clothes on your back. But the point is to exercise your brain into seeing how one thing is connected to another. Okay, so if we're starting to understand how our mindsets might embrace interdependence, how would this actually affect the physical world? Well, here in Colorado, we are uncomfortably familiar with forest fires. And here in Boulder, the recent and unprecedented Marshall Fire is burned into our landscape and our memories. So how might we talk about forest fires or any other increasing climate crisis event with this interdependent mindset? One way is through traditional ecological knowledge. This type of knowledge is based on the belief that living beings and their environments depend on each other. Indigenous knowledge and practices are included in traditional ecological knowledge because historically they've had a physical and spiritual relationship with the landscapes that they live in. However, it's not exclusive to indigenous communities. That means that hunters, foragers, fishers, and those involved with agriculture or forestry may exhibit this knowledge. It comes from observation of having a long-standing intimacy with a specific landscape. Excitingly, policymakers, scientists, and academics are all starting to turn to this type of knowing as a potential source of ideas for ecosystem management, ecological restoration, and climate change adaptations. So, circling back to forest fires, if we were going to engage traditional ecological knowledge, we might talk about cultural burns. Indigenous communities in the US and elsewhere have been practicing cultural burns for millennia. They understand that if used intentionally, fire actually restores resilience, biodiversity, and even supports the life cycles of salmon. In an effort to engage this knowledge, the US Forest Service and fire departments across the western United States are starting to turn to indigenous communities to learn about this valuable practice. In fact, in California, the Forest Service and the Nature Conservancy teamed up with the Yorick tribe to create prescribed fire training programs, so actually to learn about how to do this practice. And now together, they burn thousands of potentially dangerous acres across the United States. This example is significant because it shows that our past conservation policies, such as fire suppression, didn't look at the forests with the interdependent lens that Thich Nhat Hanh described. Fire suppression policies didn't see people, healthy soil, or salmon in a burning forest. I also love this example because it shows that we can change. We can recreate policies with an interdependent mindset. How else might we change? Well, one way is always through education. And place-based education teaches students about the interdependent dynamics of a specific location. It asks them to engage with their environments in a direct and impactful way. So if we're learning about forest fires, then students might observe that a burned log is actually a home to a significant number of reptiles, amphibians, and even birds. Place-based education also challenges the idea that only certain landscapes are natural and that only certain people can access nature. So if you can't make it out to a forest, then you might observe carbon cycles by watching an earthworm colony turn a pile of leaves into soil, and then learning about how that soil affects your gut health. It's all sophisticatedly connected. I highlight these examples because I want you to see that it is possible. Interdependence is not just a fancy concept for academic journals. It's a way of being. So, what on earth do we do? I'm not going to ask you to plant a tree or buy an electric car because those things only continue to support the status quo. Instead, I'd like to start a conversation with you. One that I hope will follow you into classrooms, coffee shops, dinner tables, and wherever else your life might lead you. I'm going to ask you to plant a proverbial seed, to look at the mundane with new eyes, to choose your future. The climate is changing. Will we change with it?